Welcome, cadets. Today's lesson is in the primary towers. These are helpful little guys that have been here since we first began the war against the balloons. They all get serious buffs from the top path of monkey villages, so be sure to throw those down when you have a cluster of primary towers. Now let's get right onto the towers. Starting off, let's look at the dart monkey. They're cheap, reliable, and can damage every balloon type with the right upgrades. Top Path gives the dart monkey a catapult that pierces through many balloons at the cost of lower attack speed. The spike ball can also bounce off walls. So at the Juggernaut upgrade, you can stick one in a corner and have it lock down an entire choke point. This also unlocks lead popping power, which can be huge, especially on those camoed lead rounds. But if you really want to close off a section of the map, Ultra Juggernaut has you covered, with each massive ball shattering into multiple smaller jugs. It wipes SRAMs and even can take down BFBs, all while being a pretty cheap tier 5. Now on the middle path, which is a good option for spam. Tier 3 lets the dart monkey throw 3 darts instead of 1, all while inheriting the faster fire rate of tier 1 and tier 2. The cheap cost of it makes it a fairly decent spam option if you feel like, I don't know, turning off your brain for the first 50-ish rounds. Just don't forget about your lead popping power. Tier 4 unlocks the Super Monkey Fan Club ability, turning itself and 10 other dart monkeys into temporary super monkeys. Add a bit of stall and you can easily get 10 super monkeys for cheap. And with the Tier 5, they become Plasma Super Monkeys, gaining lead popping powers and insane damage. If you're smart with your ability timing, you can rely on this path for an entire run. Last path for the dart monkey, the Crossbow path. Giving you camo detection from Tier 2, it's an immediately good path. Tier 3 gives the dart monkey a crossbow, which increases its range and allows the bolts to pop up to 3 layers of a balloon in one shot. Give it some pierce from the top path and you have quite the effective early game camo crusher. But when you move on to Tier 4, your pierce problems are no more. With crits, it can pierce way more balloons and deals a bunch more damage. At Tier 5, it crits basically the entire time, has a massive range, and at a price that cheap, mid-game carry achieved. Dart monkeys also have Paragon capacity, so if you collect all 3 Tier 5s, you can make a super powerful version that combines all 3 paths. The Dart Paragon can do insane damage when all the shots can bounce off walls, so be sure to place it accordingly. Also, be sure to note that the Dart Paragon, as well as every other Paragon in the game, is only really useful in free play rounds and on bosses, which we will cover in a different lesson. On to our next tower, Boomerang Monkey. This tower uses boomerangs, believe it or not. It specializes in crowd control, with early game pierce, cheap yet powerful lead popping power, and all paths help in different areas. So let's start with the top path. Gaining more pierce and switching out the boomerang for a faster glaive. The Tier 3 makes it so the glaive can ricochet between balloons. This does insane group damage when paired with the red hot rangs, allowing each glaive throw to pop 2 layers of balloons at once. Pair that with any tower buff that pops more layers and this simple Tier 3 becomes almost busted. Tier 4 is just Tier 3, but extra. Faster fire rate, more pierce, faster projectile speed. It's quite common that you'll find your glaives bouncing across the track and the entire map, as the pierce is quite high and usually doesn't get maxed with each throw. But if Tier 4 is extra, Tier 5 is deluxe. The 3 rotating blades it gains has insane value around corners, and it can finally have some stronger damage against Moab class balloons. But the Boomerang Monkey has much better options for Moab damage. Middle Path gives your Boomerang Middle Path gives your Boomerang Monkey a bionic arm, which greatly increases fire rate and gives increased Moab damage. With its cheap price, it's quite a viable option in case you forget about Moab defense around 40. But past round 40, you're going to probably want to upgrade the Tier 4, which gives you the Turbocharge ability. Once activated, the tower will shoot out rangs crazy fast with slightly increased damage for a brief period of time. This allows it to chew through multiple Moabs and can even tear down BFBs if used with friends. With the final upgrade, Permacharge, you get the Turbocharge ability permanently, with the new ability becoming stronger and shooting faster. It's a little lazy, but let's move on to the last path, the bottom path, where top path takes care of normal balloons and SRAMs, and middle path takes care of Moabs. Bottom path specializes in stalling Moabs. Yeah, admittedly, Tier 3 doesn't really do anything, it just makes the boomerangs fire straight. But Tier 4 gives the tower the ability to push back Moabs. This allows it to be a cheap solution for those early Moab rounds until you get something stronger. But if you really want to spend the big bucks, you can go for the Tier 5 and overpay for a strong anti-Moab tower. It's not terrible, but there's some better options out there for much cheaper. Boomerang Monkey can also become a Paragon, inheriting the properties of all the Tier 5 paths and cranking up the damage a ton. Boomerang Paragon also buffs primary towers, including Dart Paragon and other primary Paragons to come. Again, this is typically only useful on bosses and free play rounds. Next up, we got Bomb Shooter. Built-in lead popping, crowd control via splash damage, and a zebra... It owns a zebra. Built-in lead popping power, crowd control via splash damage, but with zebra and black balloon immunity. The paths for this tower will help it focus in on specific threats you'll face throughout a run. Top path gives you some pretty solid support, with Tier 3 knocking balloons back. Just 2 of them can completely shut out a round, assuming that you have black balloon coverage. It also has significantly larger AoE, which helps it lock down other parts of the track. Now combo that larger AoE with the Tier 4 that can stun balloons and it becomes a great support tower for controlling the map. But when we upgrade the Tier 5, it adds Moab stunning, which is huge when it hits them. Yeah, okay, sometimes DDTs are a bit too fast. Middle path is for... Okay, well, don't actually use middle path, honestly. Look, I know it's good for Moabs, but there are just some way better options. Hell, even some of the paths in the tower itself have better options. Tier 3 does okay Moab damage, Tier 4 does slightly better Moab damage with a pretty strong ability, but it's only when it gets to Tier 5 does it really feel strong. But bottom path? Bottom path is where this tower really shines. It takes the whole crowd control aspect of this tower and kicks it up to 11. Not only does Tier 2 give it potential black balloon coverage, but Tier 1 gives it more range, which is extremely powerful in a tower like this. Tier 3 adds cluster bombs, which combos with top path's heavy bombs to do some real nice and cheap crowd control. But what if I told you that also works on Tier 4? That's right, with the Tier 4's recursive cluster shots making every single second shot explode into extra cluster bombs, you can get one of the strongest crowd control towers in the whole game. Seriously, just slap 2 of them together and they'll carry you up to round 80 on simpler maps. So with them being that strong, you can only imagine how strong Tier 5 will be, and well, honestly, it's a little underwhelming. Even with every shot being a recursive cluster shot, you can get a very similar effect with just 2 or 3 of them. Its special on lives lost explode the whole screen thing just really isn't that useful except for on Lich. But enough about Bomb Shooter, let's talk about Tack Shooter. This short-range tower is one of the few actually close combat towers that we have against the balloons. Slap it down on any curve or choke point and watch it tear balloons to shreds, so long as there aren't too many. Yeah, this tower suffers from its low pierce that can kind of tank its damage on certain rounds. But let's just go right in the top path. Tiers 1 and 2 add faster fire rate, which is super helpful on every path, and Tier 3 adds lead popping powers and slightly more damage. But with that price, it isn't much damage until Tier 4. Tier 4 makes the tower spew flames out at a faster fire rate and deals much more damage. These do well against groups due to the high fire rate and extra pierce. Tier 5 makes it into a massive fireball chucking balloon melter with extra Moab damage, global range, and burn damage across the whole map. Now, it is very pricey, but it can be worth it on choke points late game. Middle path is a powerful one. Tier 3 makes it shoot out high pierce blades that only suffer because it can't have both Tier 1s and Tier 2s from the other paths. But when you upgraded the Tier 4, you get the Maelstrom ability, which launches blades across the entire map. For the cheap price that it is, this is a solid option for some early round rushes. Cerams, Pinks, even Regrows could get completely stomped by this simple Tier 4. Tier 5 upgrades the ability the Super Maelstrom, which lasts 3 times longer, pops leads and frozen balloons, and can coat the entire map with sharp spinny blades. Keeping in theme, this upgrade is pretty cheap, so it cleans up mid-game rounds and can even stay useful into the late game with some support. You like tacks? We got tacks. Bottom path is all about shooting out more and more tacks with each tier. Really nothing special here. Tier 3 shoots out 16 tacks, Tier 4 gives it 3 times attack speed, and Tier 5 shoots out 32 tacks. Slap on an out buff or any extra damage buff, and this thing can clear out Moabs and any early tiers of a boss balloon. Now on to the stall player's best friend, the Ice Monkey. This cute little guy specializes in slowing down rounds by freezing balloons. Now this does mean that towers are going to need special upgrades in order to pop frozen balloons, but it can make for some really fun strategies, like comboing boomerang monkeys or sniper monkeys for damage and crowd control. But let's say you don't want to use frozen popping power for every single tower. Well, Top Path has you covered with its Tier 4. Tier 3 hardly does anything, so we're gonna skip that. Tier 4 still freezes the balloons, but it also makes them brittle, which means every single tower does more damage to them. And since it still slows the balloon, it becomes a great support tower if you want it to be. At Tier 5, it becomes one of the best support towers in the game. Super brittle also affects Moabs, which becomes insanely helpful if you put the tower in an important corner. All in all, Top Path Ice Monkey is a great choice for all rounds. Middle Path is also a really good support path, but not as strong late game. Tier 3 has an aura that slows down balloons by 50%, which can be increased in size via tower buffs with the bottom path's Tier 2. Slowing balloons helps it freeze more, and, unsurprisingly, slows down rushes, which can threaten some runs. This tower can also freeze water nearby, which would be, kinda helpful if it wasn't for the fact that water towers are so frickin' strong. At Tier 4, you gain the Snowstorm ability, which can briefly freeze all balloons on screen, including white balloons. This really helps out the tower on rounds with a lot of white balloons and greatly increases its effective range, as well as its actual range. It gets a nice little range upgrade after being, upgraded. At Tier 5, this tower gets way more range, way more pierce, and the ability to increase the attack speed of all ice monkeys for 10 seconds, as well as freeze all the balloons for 10 seconds. The ability also slows down Moabs, which is super helpful for its cheap price. Overall, this tower can be really great throughout a whole run, but needs some ability cooldown in order to help it to be as good as Super Brittle. Still, if you master the stall playstyle, you'll hardly ever lose. And I'm only saying that because you in the back there,
I know that you're a stall player. I know your sins.
Okay, middle path took a while, so let's wrap it up with bottom path. The Ice Monkey, how do I put this? He gets a freaking gun. That's right, instead of the all-rounder attack the Ice Monkey normally has, he ditches that in favor of a cryo cannon which he can use to freeze balloons at a distance. It's pretty handy since you can target strong balloons that may have slipped by otherwise. Tier 4 makes balloons the tower hits spiky, making them pop other balloons for a short period of time. But where this path truly shines is in its Tier 5, Icicle Impale. This gives the tower insane single target and group damage and slows down Moabs, making it super strong against late game Moab rounds and DDTs. Now on to the final primary tower, the Glue Gunner. Very similar to the Ice Monkey, but with some better range, no immunities, and a very, very strong top path. So let's jump right into that. Top path allows the tower to do damage over time with its Tier 2, so all paths can use it. However, the other tiers of top path can go way harder. Tier 3 doubles the damage per second and lets it glue another balloon per shot, which is nothing compared to Tier 4, which can honestly be one of the strongest Tier 4s you can buy on some maps. While the 10 damage per second can be nice, the real power lies in the puddles the pop balloons drop. Those puddles can massively increase the tower's effective pierce and greatly help spread damage across the track. But Tier 4 is nothinger than Tier 5, which can single-handedly, with the help of a primary village, take care of an entire map. Seriously, the damage over time is fantastic, the puddles do great damage, the fire rate's super high, and I mean, if the B-roll I'm using in the background ain't convincing you, I don't know what could. Whew. Alright, we are done with top path. And now we're on to a far less impressive path, middle path. While Tier 2's glue splatter is super helpful, Tier 3's glue hose, which increases fire rate, really doesn't do much but help out the early game. But early game is pretty easy, so you really don't need it. And Tier 4, with its ability, can glue the entire screen, making balloons more vulnerable, so it does have some use. However, with how cheap the Tier 5 is, and how much better it is than Tier 4, it still feels pretty weak. So I would recommend skipping Tier 4 and just buying it when you have enough for Tier 5. Speaking of, Tier 5 lasts 15 whole seconds rather than the 2 seconds that Tier 4 does, and slows down twice as much. And all balloons take more damage during this time, so with some cooldown buffs you can almost always have this active. As for final path, bottom path, it really puts the glue in Glue Gunner. Seriously, this path turns Glue Gunner into like a slowdown button. Glue lasts twice as long with its Tier 1, slows down even more with its Tier 2, and at Tier 3 it can even glue Moabs. This makes it a solid early Moab tower and can even stay useful into the mid to late game. Well, any tower that can slow down a Moab is a pretty good tower, honestly. With Tier 4, pop balloons glued by the tower can actually stun nearby balloons. This really helps slow down the rounds and can be quite helpful if you're ever getting overwhelmed. But if you really want to pause the game, upgraded to tier 5. Super Glue literally stops Moabs and DDTs and brings everything else to a halt, with ZMOGs and BFBs being reduced to about 10% of their movement speed, but Pop Balloons still stun the BFBs and lower. It's not uncommon that this thing will completely halt a round, which is why Ninja Kiwi made it do 50 damage per shot so you can't infinitely stall out a round, which only ended up making this tower even stronger. So now you know every path for every primary tower. The lesson's over. See you cadets in the next one.